But still, our users were in the thousands, and then, maybe they started broaching the tens of thousands. And what they weren't doing is they weren't paying. So when we launched that GitHub app, we also GA'd. I said, let the floodgates open, come pay us. It took us a moment to realize they're not going to pay. They're just not. 2 years and 2 months in, we were at 100,000 ARR. Not awesome. And we burned $4 million by that time. 4 months later, we're at 650. A year later, we're at 4.5 million. A year later, we're at 19 million.
Wow.
And so the numbers really started escalating at that time. We raised $125 million in total. I would sort of point out, I don't always encourage raising so much, but I say it privately and I'm happy to say it publicly as well. It's I've got zero interest in building something small. We're building big.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Guy, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
So now you're working on a company called Tessl, which is kind of in the AI agent space, development space. But before that, you started a security company called Snyk that has grown tremendously. I think it's doing, over 300 million ARR today, which is huge. We'll start there. Take us back to, I think it was 2014, 2015 that you were kind of starting it. What was the context? Maybe give us a little bit of your background and just the origin story of it.
Sure. Maybe need some context for the background first. So I'm sort of developer by trade, moved to turn product, I guess, kind of an entrepreneur. At some point, founded my first company when I was based in Ottawa.
Small world, man.
So I founded Blaze with Mike, and within a couple of years, sold it to Akamai. Blaze was in the DevOps space, kind of making websites faster, ended up being kind of on the forefront of DevOps and kind of the first transformation, which was all about ops and performance.
And what year was this?
So this is 2010, founded Blaze.
And so kind of with Rising Cloud, AWS, all these sort of things?
Exactly. So I was a part of the Velocity conference where sort of a lot of the seminal DevOps talks came in and a lot of that wave came along. So it's kind of part of that sort of first wave. In 2012, Akamai acquired us. So pretty quickly, within a couple of years, I got a chance to be the CTO of the web performance part of Akamai. It was about half of Akamai, $700 million a year business. And this was a fun ride, learning, stayed there for about 3.5 years, opening Akamai to the community, been involved in things like HTTP2 and before that Speedy, thinking, a lot about sort of broadening and modernizing Akamai.
What did you sell, by the way? In early sell, that was just a really good kind of irrational buyer sort of thing, or just the opportunity within Akamai?
You're kind of using and zag. So Blaze was kind of like a web page compiler, sort of set it before the web page and made it faster by sort of tweaking the CSS, the JavaScript, the images on top of it. And it needed to be in the line of fire. And we built sort of a smart architecture that allowed us to put a more lightweight component in the line of fire and then a brain behind the scenes to do some async computation. And that worked well from an interest and it felt right, but it really felt like the right home for this type of technology would be a place that is already in the line of fire. But we had a lot of partnership engagement with CDNs and ADCs, application delivery controllers like load balancers, and content delivery networks, CDNs like Akamai. And so it really felt very natural. This is how a lot of the early kind of users and customers wanted to build. And it was a means for them to innovate or to differentiate when everything was at network level acceleration and we offered application layer acceleration. And so it was very compelling to them. And so it just felt that from a long-term perspective, we either compete with the CDNs and ADCs or we get acquired. And we were in a good place to, have multiple potential bidders. And so it was sort of felt like the right home. In the grand scheme of things, especially in the Snyk scale, a very small acquisition, but it was enough to sort of put me in financial independence and let me kind of aim higher. Or we got to a few paying customers, we were in market. We had some big publicity moment when we published a mobile performance report that showed Android beating iPhone, which made us sort of a top headline in sort of tech news for about 3 days in a row, and Apple responded on it. That was a wild ride. But eventually we were, I don't know that we independently acquired product market fit. It's not that we missed it or we wouldn't have gotten it. It's just we got acquired before we really got there.
It was early, right?
But inside Akamai, it worked very well and it immediately sort of sold well. And I'd also say we had a learning in which we kind of broke it apart a bit in Akamai, as in we started off as like the whole Blaze offering and more in one unit in the premium product that Akamai offered. And over time, it really became like units of acceleration versus one magical thing. So a lot of learnings. I think it was the right thing at the time, but what it did, I moved with Akamai, was in a global role. Anyway, I moved to London for a variety of reasons and got the itch to do another startup.
How long did you stay at Akamai?
I spent 3.5 years at Akamai. I learned a ton.
Did you know you wanted to go back into it, or just kind of seeing things as they go?
Not really. I think until I got close to the 3-year mark, I was, learning a lot, growing a lot, well paid, and felt like I'm building up, like having an impact, on the world. I think the primary driver was that I felt to make more of an impact at Akamai and the stuff that mattered to me, I probably needed to move to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Akamai was headquartered. That wasn't something I wanted to do, and sort of deal with a lot of like cultural change and transformation to sort of allow more modernization. Akamai, brilliant company, a lot of brilliant people, but very risk averse. And I'm very risk forward. And so I think I maybe could have done something, but not from afar. And then, so my first decision was to leave and found something. Actually, my intent was to take a year off. I had a long departure from Akamai, so I resigned in March, and July 1st was my last day. I had this sort of long notice period, so I winded down, and July 9th, I incorporated Snyk. So it was
okay.
Not the next year, the same year, 8 days later.
The idea was a year off to like travel, or a year off to figure out what to do. Like, was it more intentional?
The intent of the year off was more just an opportunity. I was in a place to enable that, and I think what happened was that as I wound down my time there, just my mind started going. What do I want to build? Export many, many different ideas. And eventually the idea that I settled on in Snyk was conceptually bring DevOps to security. So I spent a decade in security prior to founding my first company in application security, software security. We always wanted to get to developers and always failed. In fact, Watchfire got acquired by IBM, but IBM Rational, that was the developer decision of IBM, thinking we will bring that in. And it succeeded financially to sort of sell to auditors, but it didn't succeed in breaking through to developers. And I felt like with DevOps, the need was stronger than ever. And there was a playbook now to try and play. And that I had an unusual position of knowledge, of familiarity with both the AppSec space and the DevOps space. And I guess I wanted, from a personal perspective, to sort of swing for, something bigger. And I think I would have done the same with Blaze, with that opportunity. But I did get left a little bit with, well, what is it like if you build a bit bigger? And a bit of a chip on the shoulder to say, well, look, I know Mike is awesome. We founded it together. I kind of brought the idea and all that. He joined as a co-founder a little bit after, but a little bit of maybe showing that I can do it even without him. And I got interested in the CTO role. I got much more interested and informed around the business side. I was much more of a technologist before. And so before I founded my first company, Carl Snyder, an Ottawa-based sort of amazing guy, head of product at Watchfire at some time, I asked him when I became product manager, I asked, hey, is that a good path to a CTO? Because I felt like I want to be a CTO at some point. And he said, well, the best way to become a CTO is to found a company and call yourself a CTO.
Yes, true. Easiest path there, 100%.
That's what I did in Blaze. I found a company, I called myself CTO. And then I now found a company called myself CEO.
And so maybe tell me a little bit more, like, especially for a non-technical audience, what was it that you saw at this point, as juncture 2015, in the security DevOps space?
Security has historically been very infrastructure oriented. You can even sort of say that that's even true today, which is very much about patching servers and systems and networks. And application security has always been the sort of surrogate child.
This is like the firewall thing when you were talking like infrastructure?
Application security is more about SQL injection or sort of cross-site scripting, such vulnerabilities that are, so the network securities are the firewalls, are the sort of the server patch.
Right. When you mentioned more infrastructure focus that you're talking about. Okay.
Exactly. Like misconfigured sort of clouds today. At the time, there was no cloud. And application security is more about vulnerabilities in your application code. And so you wrote something that allows someone to log in incorrectly, right? Or trick the system into throwing some exception that leaks data, or embed some piece of JavaScript in your page that filters data out. And so all of those, this cross-site scripting. So all of those vulnerabilities, initially they were just not seen. And, in Sanctum turned Watchfire, in my first decade of it, a lot of that sort of first wave of this world of application security was around convincing security teams that this matters, that, this imbalance of 75% of the attacks and hacks happen at the application layer, but 25% of the budget or the investment happens over there. And that's probably generous. But the problem is it's a place that is out of the control of the security team. Security teams have always been quite close to IT teams. And there's a lot of interactions, and IT is central and they do things kind of thoroughly. And so they were very kind of aligned over there. And application security is the world of software development. It moves fast. And the security team doesn't have the mandate to come along into the security team and say, you can't ship this because there's a vulnerability.
You got to be looking at the code on a more regular basis and understanding what's changing. And
it changes very rapidly, and the knowledge is very custom. And suddenly you're saying, well, this form field cannot have, non-alphabetic characters. And it turned out that this is like an address of someone. And maybe sometimes it's in, has some sort of character there that, now you break functionality, you can ship a product, to some address, right? Or something like that. And there are many, many examples of that. And so it's been this dance in application security to find these vulnerabilities in this sort of complicated application analysis world. That was the first wave, if you will. And increasingly, there was this notion of shift left. Okay, you can find these problems, but you find them after the fact. It's so expensive. Can you move that left as in the development lifecycle, earlier in the development lifecycle? And this shift left, like I was saying, shift left in 2002, it wasn't new. It was from the very early days of application security. But the problem is developers didn't want to use these products.
Because for a developer trying to put out features, this is just annoying.
Yeah. So this has been sort of this ongoing challenge, how do you put it in the build and all that. Now, during that stretch of time, two things have happened. One, development has accelerated and the autonomy of development team has accelerated. And especially with DevOps, there was a lot of continuous shipping, continuous delivery, you get things to production. So the opportunity for security to engage has kind of been taken away, right? Like it's very, very hard for security to come along, multiple deployments a day, and definitely no place for security, no mandate for security to say stop or slow down. Everything was about sort of speed and autonomy. And so that made the ability of security sort of to find issues by themselves and their ability to scale and keep up with the pace just like a non-starter. The second thing that happened is that IT teams have become modern and dev-oriented and fast. And suddenly you saw the world of IT ops go from being a cost center to being like a business enabler, to being sometimes something that is celebrated. Hey, these companies like Netflix, like Amazon, they're sort of great DevOps teams. And because of that, they are more successful. They can ship software faster. And so the premise is the need is greater. And there's an opportunity and a role model to transform. Can we do to security what has been done to ops? Can we create DevSecOps, which was the eventual kind of narrative?
And just to say back to like the idea of being like DevOps got themselves to a place where they're seen, and they are certainly by developers, like they're helping developers ship things faster, getting to continuous delivery, all these sort of infrastructure things that devs don't need to worry about anymore. But they understand that's because of this IT team that I'm even able to do this so fast. And so now they're an ally in kind of their mission.
Correct. And I think developers, but also business, so the business, I can proactively, like before the IT team was like, what's the fewest, like with the minimal investment given to this team because they're just a cost center. Now it's like, well, we want to excel here because we want to be a company that can move fast. A lot of that there's a lot of like hand-in-hand change here that happened with the adoption of cloud and the fact that infrastructure has become software, has become elastic or software driven. And so that created the cloud native methodologies and DevOps. And, this is an evolution. It started with Agile and Scrum and sort of, modern team and then went into DevOps. And so I'm old enough to have been through all of that journey, right? So the opportunity was say, okay, let's bring DevOps to security and to specifically application security. And the core thesis of the product was, or even the company would say, well, if you want to get developers to use a security product, you have to build a developer tooling company, not a security company. Like a big reason why developers weren't using all these different products is that these were really like auditor products that were sort of shoved into a developer flow. They didn't care about, the developers didn't understand the developers. They didn't think about motivations of the developers. And so Snyk was very declaratively a developer tooling company that happened to tackle security. This conversation, this was like a core to the ethos of the product. It was, in the color scheme of the website, we had all these debates around, when I tell you about it's a developer product, I want it to be warm, a builder, the color scheme should be that. But when I tell you have a high security vulnerability, I have a severity vulnerability, I want to scare you like a little bit, you should sort of...
Red, yeah. Blood red, yeah.
Snyk's logo is a guard dog because animal logos were all the rage at the time, but it's also like an appropriate sort of security logo.
And did you just inherently understand all this because of, what your background was, or did you have to do customer discovery and these sort of classical things?
Yeah, because like I think I had a slightly early understanding of what DevOps is because of my sort of performance experience and building that out. And I had my sort of depth of AppSec expertise. I also built a team in London and Tel Aviv and kind of brought skills within the team from those two. So it was very much around tunnel vision. Like, I don't care about security. I want to build a developer tooling company. And notably, we could talk about sort of GTM. So I'll kind of say one thing here and then I'll pause, which is it came into everything, the whole being of the company, who we hired, the community approach, the transparency, like a lot of things. But probably most, in hindsight, sort of notable is that we decided a product-led growth go-to-market, bottoms up. At the time, PLG acronym didn't exist, but the bottom-up go-to-market, which was highly unusual in security. So there was a lot of learnings about that.
What is the value prop for a developer? Like, why, like, besides the branding and the fact that that's your ICP, but what are you actually telling them? Hey, you want to use Snyk because of what?
So first of all, it's a great question. And I think a lot of it, comes down to motivations. And I like telling, I've got over 100 angel investments. I sort of get the benefit of learning from a lot of journeys and maybe like needs to sharpen my advice to be a little bit useful. And one of the sentences I like repeating is, nobody cares about your product. They care about the problem you're solving for them. And so you really need to think about who is it that you're solving the problem for, and what is the problem, what is the need. And just like as a bit of a toolkit thing, there's something called a power statement that I really like. It's a sales technique. A guy named Geva on our team, he found it in a sales book, but I like it. It's like a product definition and messaging exercise in which you build this 3-part document. You build a sequence of motivations for users. Like, developers come to Snyk because they are afraid of dependencies. They've been burned on it. They hate rework because security sends things like that. They think security is an aspect of quality and they take pride in their work. Security teams come to Snyk because they can't get developers to use their security product, because at the time we were starting by focusing on open source library vulnerability. So they think that's a big threat for them, etc. And then like a short one-liner, right, max 2 about what your product does, intentionally minimize, and then differentiation. And your blurb should be some of the top, the thing in the middle, and some of the bottom. And it needs to be cohesive. If it's not cohesive, you've got a problem. Your differentiation doesn't match your kind of customer's pain. You're over-rotating. So we did a bunch of these types of exercises to say why do developers, and I just rattled off some of the motivations. And we also leaned into like, how do we engage and entertain the developers and get them to see the problem? And so, for instance, security is boring. It's like insurance, it's risk, it's doomsday. But hacking is fun. And sort of seeing hacking live is really fun. And so we created this talk called Stranger Danger, because again, our initial focus was on the fact that you're using third-party libraries and they might have vulnerabilities, and do you even know? And you can get hacked because of them. And so Stranger Danger is, of course, also the men in the lollipop, the back of the van, it's like that's how they educate kids not to get kidnapped. So we created this sort of fun hacker talks that sort of show how you can get hacked, and people would viscerally feel like we'd be using popular libraries. It's like, yeah, I use that library. Do I have that problem? Like, well, there's an easy way to find out, but you can use Snyk. So there was a lot of that increased motivation. And then I guess this comes a little bit into that product-led growth aspect. But I think in everything that you do in life, and specifically in every product you build, there's how much you care and there's how hard it is. And you need to care more than it is hard, and you'll do it. And so one of your tools is to make someone care more. But that's a slow process. The other tool you have is to make it less hard. And less hard is contextual. Less hard for a security person. Like, for a security person, access to code is very hard. For a developer, access to code is easy. But how much does a security person kind of care about the vulnerability is much higher than a developer. So that balance is, and getting it right really kind of helps you like both find the reasons they care, but also make it easy. For developers, the reason they care is quality. Like, most developers just want to write great code because they're part of that, and security is part of that, or? The 3 reasons I kind of rattled off are the primary. I'd rank them as open source, like dependencies in general were just like a scary domain. So developers were looking for something that it was easy for them to believe that a dependency can be like, can fail them. And so they were just sort of looking for things that would give them easy visibility to separate like the good from the bad, because they've all had like backward compatibility breakages and things like that. So it might not have been security per se, but just some form of like hygiene about their dependency was a motivation. There were people that cared about quality, security as quality, and started taking pride, especially those that were sort of DevOps forward, because they started caring about infrastructure and deployments. They started hearing about cloud misconfigurations. And so there was some awareness over there. So that was a good early audience. And then I think a lot of it was about that rework, around this notion of like, I will find these problems ahead.
And not have to rewrite code later, which is annoying for everyone.
Exactly, because it's a big deal, especially when you choose a framework and you find out it was vulnerable, or sometimes you need to do like a major version upgrade. All that said, like we started with a security threat of open source library vulnerabilities.
Is that similar to like ChainGuard? I think I interviewed ChainGuard not long ago. And
So ChainGuard, I guess I take pride that I think Snyk managed to kind of kick in motion a whole bunch of AppSec.
okay, yeah, I think they'd be much after, right?
ChainGuard is like the evolution. The vulnerabilities in the open source libraries is an aspect of software supply chain security, which is a term that didn't exist. It's like a lot before that. When we came out, there wasn't really an established, like probably Black Duck was if you heard about it, it's like a very enterprisey kind of ancient tool, very unpleasant, started from licenses and then did some security. But it wasn't, that's what I was about to say, is like it was not a well-served problem. And there were starting to be examples of how it breached companies. And the 2 years into Snyk, there was the Equifax breach, if you remember it, like a massive breach, 300. And that was very straight up like a Java struts, an unpatched and unupdated Java struts vulnerability. The doing is like to the extent that the CEO is testifying in front of Congress.
Unfortunately, it's like the best possible marketing you could have had.
Security works like this. Like the latest breach is in everybody's like opening slide.
Right.
But we happen to be like straight up that vulnerability. So we did kind of pick both the sort of the dev approach that was right, but also a problem domain in which it was much more about motivating you to action than it was about competition. There was a lot less competition. And it was an easier problem than static analysis and vulnerabilities in your code, which are much more subjective and much longer defined. Vulnerabilities in your dependencies, if a dependency is there, it's a database, it's a match. And so we built a good database. We built hard technology, but it was a much easier to absorb product for developers. And I think the right choice in terms of that difficulty, like, hard versus care, because like static analysis, now Snyk has a great static analysis product, and I think it takes pride in being much easier than alternatives. It is still harder than the open source vulnerability product because it's just a more complicated problem domain.
And for a developer using this product, like it just means they work with you to see the vulnerabilities in their dependencies, or you just patch it for them and they know that they're working on something that's safe.
One of our sort of perspectives when we think about developer versus auditor is, an auditor's problem is to find a problem, a developer's job is to fix them. And so everything in the product from day one, from like a month into the company, when we sort of shipped this sort of crap little product, beta, included not just finding an issue, but fixing it. In open source dependencies, the fix is pretty much always an upgrade. And we actually introduced an ability to patch. Sometimes you have a library that's vulnerable and doesn't have a fix. And we introduced 2015, we introduced an ability to patch, because oftentimes it's like a line of code. So install the old version of the library, and then we will just like layer on this one line and we'll fix the vulnerability. People were dead afraid of it. Like they were really had a hard time accepting it. Even if it was really good, it never broke. Like in years, never had a single case in which it broke an application. People were afraid of it, so much so there was so much resistance, we stopped doing it. Like people stayed with the vulnerability instead of patching it. And you mentioned ChainGuard. Actually, funny enough, today, one of ChainGuard's newest offerings to patch vulnerabilities. I was just talking to Dan Lawrence the other day. It makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you? And it's very common in the operating system. Again, application layer, like people change slowly. So
yeah, I know we're getting specific, but part of it was just to get into that mind, because I think even non-technical people know developers. And so like, they kind of know that ICP. And so just trying to understand what value you're providing them. So let's move to the PLG piece of it all. I mean, bottoms up PLG is so like sexy, especially these days. Like everybody wants to, because it feels like, oh my God, if it worked, it just kind of happens, Dropbox, Slack, like whatever, you just kind of grow for free. But it's exceptionally hard to like get off the ground. How did you do it, especially at the beginning, like from a standstill? How did you get those first 1,000 developers on?
So if you allow me, like before I go there, I want to understand, kind of explain the lay of the land in security, then and now actually. So security is a market that lends itself to a top-down sale for specific reasons. Security, first of all, it's an asymmetric game. So the attacker only needs one entry point while the sort of defender needs to plug them all. So it's kind of an unfair game to the defender. And so that means CISOs always need to be on top of like buying some sort of new solution. Every time there's a new technology, serverless, containers, mobile, AI, there's a new set of security threats. And typically there would be new breed of security vendors that help tackle that. And so they have this very fragmented world. And it's very hard for them to say, like amidst this fragmentation, to then also accept that like one director of engineering would use this product to secure their open source vulnerabilities, and the other one would use this other one. They want to govern. So it really lends to be central because they have this fragmentation already, and that's already hard. And then on top of that, it's a very hard to measure domain. Like, does this product actually protect you? If it does protect you, does that really matter, right? It's insurance. It's like, would people have attacked you anyway? Like, you put this great new lock on your door and nobody broke in. Does that mean it's money well spent? Maybe you didn't put that and nobody broke in. Are you just sort of playing with fire here, or are you and so it's really, really hard. It's very subjective. And so between the central nature and the sort of this very subjective view of the threat and the efficacy, it's a very like wine and dine industry. Like the CISO's central or like a security leader subjective perspective, which you can affect if you take them to a dinner or sort of, win their time, is very impactful. And that's just sort of the reality of this field, which makes it kind of murky sometimes. And so bottom up doesn't really kind of work in this world. It's not an empowered space, and definitely not for developers. What happened was differently in the Snyk world is that in AppSec, security could be all central, but if developers don't use the product, it's dead in the water. And so the problem that they kept kind of banging their head against the wall with was, how do I get developers to use the product? So it was a real need for them to embrace it. And so our view was say, well, the big problem, the thing we need to tackle is to get developers to embrace the product. And if we do that, money will come, which we should get to because it took a while to come. But that was the thesis, and that's why we sort of focused on that. So developer tools that use bottom up, like you don't need, I think a lot about what I call the minimum unit of value. What is like the smallest value proposition that is truly valuable to someone? And smallest in scope, smallest in functionality. And in the developer world, it's a single developer on their desktop writing code or like building an application. For security, it's governance. So it's probably like a business unit, minimum unit. But for developers, because it's that single developer and because developers are more empowered, dev tools generally win bottom up. You have to win over the developer first. They have a lot of that. And so we very much embraced this sort of bottom up motion. How did we get the users? Basically the same way all other dev tools. We went to conferences, we wrote content, we sought out integrations. Our big break was open source. And so we built a product that was, to begin with, a developer tool. They had a great DX, developer experience. We built a command line interface tool. It's very easy, free to use. You can download it, run it on your app. We'll tell you if it's vulnerable. And we didn't even require a login at the beginning. Then we sort of started requiring sort of login to run some scans. And then, you'd kind of go along and you do it. And people would download it. We started through a conference presentation. This is post Akamai. So I was sort of, had enough notoriety to get like a keynote slot on it. Got a few, dozens, then hundreds of people trying it, using it, saying good things about it, not putting it in the build, like not using it regularly, using it once, not continuing it. And we kept pushing, like, why? We reached out to users, spoke to them. I flew around, lived in London at the time, spent a ton of time in the US.
To meet with developers one-on-one, to go to their office, to...
Went to meetups, to, any meetup that would take me, I'd had 7 people in the audience, 15 people in the audience. I sort of chased around. That was a heavy travel year, right? Anypath literally kind of flew to a presentation in which I had 3 people.
Especially for a free product, you're like, even if they all use it, like it's not like I'm making a $50,000 sale.
We have tens of thousands of people who have followed the show. Are you one of those people? You want to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of those tens of thousands of followers. So hit the follow button.
It was, but you don't know where it will come, right? And you work and you build a relationship and you invest in these people and you understand what motivates them. And it's just like a lot of conversations that really mostly I did. And I had a great team. They also did a bunch of those. Like I was the road warrior, a lot of them did it locally. As we learned, we really tried to think about like, what is the sort of the barrier? And eventually we concluded that putting it in the build was just too hard. And there were sort of 2 parts to it. One was just the technical, like they had to go off and do another thing, which they weren't immediately motivated to do, which is now run this test in the build. And the second is that the build tests a state. And so if you have vulnerabilities in there, not all vulnerabilities are like urgent to fix. And if you put it in the build and there was a vulnerability, it would break the build. That's a big deal to break the build. It's like pull the core of a manufacturing line. And moreover, if a new vulnerability was discovered in a dependency you're already using, so you're using nothing changed in your code, but suddenly one of the libraries proved to be vulnerable because like the world learned about it. Suddenly your build would break with you not doing anything, which is not a good experience. And so what we eventually concluded was we figured out that we can create a different view, which was a GitHub app integration. So we created this sort of app in which it connected to your Git repo, which at the time the security controls around adding an integration were a bit more lax. It was easier to do. It would add, Snyk into it. And so we will find your sort of source code. We will tell you if any of these libraries are vulnerable. And we will now also check every time you make a pull request, you sort of propose a change, we will say, are you adding a vulnerable library? So it's a point of change. It's like with Google's kind of intent moment, like some point in which you own this, you've just added a vulnerability. So only then do we engage by default. Also, we don't block this. If you don't want, you can push through it. But by default, what we tell you, why wouldn't you want to know that you're about to add a library that's vulnerable? And then when a new vulnerability was disclosed, we will tell you about it, but we'll tell you about it by opening a fix pull request. So we will open a pull request that upgrades it because of the vulnerability. So like handing it to you on a silver platter.
Which again, you can decide when you fix or how urgent it is relative to every other priority you have.
Exactly. So you can choose how you react, but it was a very easy, and it became this like, why wouldn't you? We also created this sort of badges you can add to your repo to sort of take pride of the fact vulnerability 0, so.
And still a free product at this point?
Still free. I'll talk about money in a sec, but still free. And we also reached out to open source libraries and we got them to install it. And that was a big deal because it created this sort of viral loop of people seeing that this is possible. Every time you open a fixed pull request on a repo that someone watches, they get an email. And so that became kind of a means of distribution, and visibility. And I want to point out that I kind of hand-waved something in there, which is we look at your library and we see if there's vulnerability, like at the repository, see if you're using any vulnerable libraries. Dependencies don't work that way. You use 10 libraries directly and they pull in 200 others. And you don't know that unless you build the application. And building the application is now starting to be involved. Like that's a per application, it's different, it's custom. And so we built a pretty hard piece of technology which approximates the dependency tree, kind of like resolves it without actually building the app. So we can give you that analysis. This was imperfect, but it was pretty good. It was hard tech. And that really helped enable this great UX. It was very UX driven. Now you do next, you add all your repos, you get immediate visibility and knowledge about which vulnerabilities you have, and you're already integrated in a way that is now allowing me to provide continuous value. So we can talk about money, but like in terms of the break, the best kind of moment to describe amidst many, many small improvements, I think that sort of GitHub app and the open source approach was a big part of getting the sort of the first wave of users.
Did you see with those changes the sort of word of mouth that leads to true PLG and referrals? Like, because at some point the meetups don't add enough. They don't have enough juice.
So yes, this was definitely an inflection point. Kind of from early days, we had one of the best developer adoption kind of numbers for a security product, which made for very mediocre adoption numbers for a regular dev. For a dev tool, we were really not that awesome. We joined HeavyBit, which was the sort of DevTools accelerator. Now it's just a VC that focuses on DevTools. I felt like really embarrassed, with my numbers as compared to everybody around, even the ones that didn't make it anywhere. But we were in security. So we like broke through as a security tool for developers. But for a developer tool as a whole, we were just like very lightly adopted. But still, our users were in the thousands. And then, maybe they started broaching the tens of thousands. And they were continuous now. And what they weren't doing is they weren't paying. So if you say PLG, so when we launched that GitHub app, we also GA'd. We said, let the floodgates open now, come pay us. We were very generous about it. For a month, it's free, and then you can sign up for it and whatever. It took us a moment to realize they're not going to pay. They're just not going to pay. And the payment was like $20 a month. That was like a sobering moment. Also starting to think about the runway.
How much did you raise at that point?
So this is about a year into the company, a year and 2 months maybe. I had raised the $3 million seed, and I was probably spent half of it by that time. So I guess kind of there's two stories that come out of this. One is on the personal journey and one is on sort of the PLG side. So I'll quickly say the personal one just to sort of relate, but I think we're talking PMF here. So I'll go back to that. On the personal side, what happened was in about sort of November of that year, right? So Snyk was founded July 2015. We took us to June 2016 is when we kind of figured out, we launched a few months later, in October, we launched the initial CLI beta. We searched for, this path for about sort of 7-8 months. In June, we launched the GA and the GitHub app. And then, sort of call it September, sort of realized, okay, it's not making any money. I started talking a lot more to security people, kind of made peace with the fact that the buyer is a security person. Around November, there was this sort of wave of inbound from investors. who saw the external usage and saw that it's security and assumed revenue is behind the scenes, and everybody was interested and everybody's, and by the beginning of December, I bit and I kind of turned on this sort of preemptive round telling, one investor was like, hey, there's a lot, I'm about to get a term sheet over here. Everybody was interested, everybody engaged, everybody, I got to ask me for the partner meeting, stay over the weekend in Andreessen Horowitz to sort of present to, and nobody converted. And everybody basically peeked behind the curtains, saw there's no revenue, says, oh, classic DevTool. You get some usage, not even that amazing a number, but nobody's paying for it. Come back when you have more traction. We'd love to maintain a relationship, blah, blah, blah. And around the same time, my father-in-law passed away. It was some sad moments over there. It was a really tough, that December was a really hard kind of personally. Ed Sim at Bold Start kind of came through massively and topped us up, at the seed extension at the sort of the best number we did get, but a small check. So it was, because we did get a little bit of a conversion, just not the right terms, not the right investors. And that really kind of helped us continue for the subsequent, I think kind of September the next year is really when I would sort of say we kind of broke through. So that's a bit of the personal story. I don't know, what kind of...
No, that was helpful. Yeah, what was the unlock? Because I also want to make sure we touch on Tessl a little bit, but what was the unlock on the monetization?
So the key lesson I'd sort of say is what we missed was, developer, that's the user, that is not the buyer. And when I talk about product market fit, I actually separate between product user fit and product buyer fit. I think we have cracked the product user fit, which is critical for PLG. And I think PLG is best when the distance between the user and the buyer is small, right? Best case scenario is the user is the buyer. You use the product at some point, you love it. At some point, you kind of hit a paywall. ChatGPT is kind of like that, maybe they sort of hit it, you upgrade.
It's kind of full alignment because then you just focus on product. When you find founders that are it's all about product, they tend to be that situation, right? Like a Notion, a Slack, a Dropbox, or whatever. It's the product's great. People are going to pay. It's true if that distance is small. It's harder when... Exactly.
Yeah. And so the second best is when the buyer is the user's boss. It's okay, the user will fall in love, they'll bring it to their boss. But the further away the buyer is, the harder it is. And for us, the distance between the developer and the security person was substantial. And we neglected the needs of the security person. We didn't think about governance. We didn't think about the fact that for security, as I mentioned before, they need a breadth of coverage. So a developer, if I'm a JavaScript developer, I couldn't care less if you support PHP or not. It just doesn't matter. But if I'm a security person, I can't have 5 stacks, each use 5 different tools. And so we really spent the subsequent year expanding governance and reporting, enterprise organization coverage, stack support, because we were very Node.js only, and then sort of expanded a little bit, but we needed to expand quickly. And that was a grind, and as we built those out, I think about a year later, we were roughly at the time that we crossed some chasm. There were a couple of breaches during that time, but the Equifax one was the biggest one. And so, that gave us another tailwind. And, that was 2 years and 2 months in, we were at 100,000 ARR. Not awesome. And we burned $4 million by that time. 4 months later, we're at 650. A year later, we're at 4.5 million. A year later, we're at 19 million.
Wow.
And so the numbers really started escalating at that time.
And that motion, I assume, was find an organization where you have a bunch of developers using it. And then now with all these governance pieces that you've added, go sell up top.
Well, I think there's the product aspect and the sort of the GTM aspect. So from a product aspect, we had to build all these capabilities around that breadth. So the product will be, it's not just enterprise grade, it was befitting of the breadth and the need of the security user. And from a GTM perspective, we started evolving this sort of pincer movement of outbound reaching. We still try, and sometimes it's quite productive. It's still worthwhile, especially in smaller companies, to go from a user straight to the buyer internally, get the developer to refer you to the right person. But especially the bigger the company is, the more we needed to do this pincer movement of building an outbound. It sends a note to the AppSec person in the organization, say, hey, did you know that 7 developers in your organization are already using and loving Snyk on it? Do you want to talk? And for a good while, I hope still today, Snyk was just sort of such a modern indicator. You want to use this. And now I did a few other growth hacks. I ran a podcast called The Secure Developer before podcasts were cool. And I could give a stage to the forward-thinking AppSec people to tell their story and share their practices. Again, taking a page out of the DevOps book of sharing. We built a community around sort of DevSecOps and DevSecOn and invested in that. So we kind of started building a movement, which might kind of tail us over to the Tessl story as well.
Yeah, so now we're going to fast forward crazy because this is still 2016, maybe 2017 that we're talking about now.
Yeah.
We're going to go all the way to 2024. You're doing hundreds of millions in ARR, or maybe 2023. When was it that you started to think about the next thing? How does Tessl happen?
So Snyk's 10 years old now. At about sort of 5-ish years into the journey, I brought in this amazing guy, sort of Peter McKay, who I've known many years, to be a CEO. And it was an opportunistic, it was a great complementary skills to me. And anyways, it's a story in its own right. But, like after a lot of deliberations and conversations with him and all that, got to convince him and got myself convinced that it's the right move. Joined the company, we built it, we grew together substantially over COVID and built all that. And I was kind of leading, forward-thinking product strategy, led a bunch of acquisitions, built some sort of strategy. And after a while of that, I did start thinking about what's my role in the company? What do I do next? I took a sabbatical to just sort of sort my minds and my thoughts out.
In when, 22?
Yeah, I guess at the end of 22, or so I took a good while, 5-6 months sabbatical. I decided I want to come back part-time, and I worked on Snyk's AI strategy at sort of the beginning of 23. And the more I kind of worked on that, the more I kind of got the bug to say, I want to just work on that. And because Snyk secures software development, you can't really think about Snyk's AI strategy without building a thesis about where would software development go. And the more I thought about that, the more I kind of realized that's what I want to build. So the last step was kind of accepting that I'm an addict and I want to do it again.
When did you leave to formally start Tessl?
The beginning of 2024. I resigned. I stayed on the board for another year. After a year, it was just kind of hard to sort of manage the two passions. I had lost enough context for my day-to-day at Snyk that I needed to invest more time in that. So I remain, I advise, I support. I'm sort of very close to the company, but I not officially kind of on the board. And I went on to found Tessl.
Yeah, what is Tessl? I mean, there's so much happening in AI and development. Where does Tessl fit in? What unique opportunity do you see?
So Tessl, we believe that software in the AI world, software will move from being code-centric to being spec-centric. Today, software is really defined by the code. You get some requirements, you write some code, you throw the requirements away, and you do that again. Eventually, the code is the definition of what your product is. Nobody remembers, what is the product's actual kind of functional requirements. It's institutional knowledge. And eventually this lack of knowledge makes code slow because every time you change it, you might break something. It's risky. The more complicated the product, the more it is. And eventually you find yourself in this decomposition project where you try to map back out what your product does so that you can write it again. And we think with LLMs, we can do better, and we can capture in a document of some sort, some spec, what it is that you want to build, how you want to build it, and have the AI kind of write the code. So that's the future we believe in. And we think there's an opportunity to build, to sort of shape this new development paradigm, which has kind of come to be called spec-driven development, and build a platform to say, well, what is this spec? How do you debug something like this? How do you observe a running system? How do you version it? What's the software ecosystem here? And build the right platform for it.
Is this similar maybe to what people are doing on the front end, which is you want to just design something and the code just spits out and you change the design and change the code, but now it's more with the back end logic where you would be doing it?
So yes and no. So the notion of natural language based programming is happening everywhere. Lovable, Bolt, all of those, all the agents, Claude, you give an instruction and something gets built. The key distinction in our world is that you really need to sort of write down what you want to happen, and that is a long-lived asset, and increasingly one that more of the weight is on. So we talk about this journey from spec-assisted development to spec-driven to spec-centric software. Maybe I should talk about where it starts, right? So this maybe a bit of a PMF story on it. So for the first year, it's hey, this is the destination. It's more than just sort of prompts. It's about the fact that the code is disposable. Today, you make the prompt. Most of the knowledge is in the code. The prompt says, how do I modify the code? It is to understand what's been previously written to modify it. We're talking about a future in which the code is unimportant. You have a requirements document of sorts that says all the things that matter, and the code can be rewritten. It's a future. It's not a present. We spent about a year trying to figure out how to connect it to today because the LLMs are not good enough to really do that yet.
The idea being that you would just, as a PM, let's say, just mess around with requirements over time, and the code would be in the back. You don't really care. You're just in this kind of requirements doc-like thing.
Yeah, I think specs can be at various levels of resolution, right? They can be very detailed. They can be less. Think about a manager guiding a team, because that's what you're doing. You're kind of guiding AI labor. And so you can give very light instructions and sort of empower the team to make the decisions, at which point you need to think about what information sources they have to make the right decisions. You have to think about how would you verify their work. And in some cases, you'd be very specific and it says this is precisely what you want to do and get down to the implementation choices. Sometimes you'll be high. So specs can vary. They're not a single spec. There needs to be an architecture. You think about reusable specs, so you don't reinvent the wheel. You don't want, a different logger for every system in your first stack. The key kind of learning over there, though, is like this is anchored in the future, which I think is important for a startup. This is going to happen. We're going to build it. But today it doesn't quite work. And for a long while, we figured like, where do you start? The learning we've come to is where you start, the right sort of starting point became kind of apparent or like came to life in the form of agents. And what happens with agents is agents do everything I described before, but faster, right? They code faster, but then they forget faster, and they create spaghetti code faster. They get you in trouble faster. They get you into the state in which you have this set of code that you don't know why it was written like this, and that is fragile to change. And they don't have institutional memory. Like the agent you open tomorrow doesn't remember what today's agent did. And so they need specs. They need you to guide them to say, like, what do you want them to build? Even when they decide what to build, you need them to capture that in some specs so that tomorrow's agent will remember that intent, so that you can engage and say, hey, you're trying to build the wrong thing versus you're just failing it. And then as a company, you need to say, well, how do I coach them about how to build? What are my policies? What are my internal platforms? How would you find out about that? What are my best practices? How do you want to write commit messages, like any resolution? And you need to be able to distribute that to the fast-changing agent space. And you need to be able to evaluate, like you told it to do something, but does it typically follow, which changes from model to model and from agent to agent. And so to us, that is the starting point for sort of spec-driven development and our, if you will, current thesis on product market fit. It looks pretty compelling per the demand that we're getting.
Where does this fit relative to like a Claude Code or something else that people are using daily?
So it integrates on top of Claude Code. So it makes agents better. It's a better development methodology with those agents. It's a means of managing the agents. It has a platform aspect to it, telling you how to build. And it has an app dev element of just making sure that what you build gets created and gets stored alongside the code as the sort of document of intent that continues to live with the code. And then over time, more and more weight will shift away from the code into these specs as they mature, as they accrue experience. So at some point, you'd be able to say, hey, this is whatever, Spring 7, jump it to Spring 11, right? Or the sort of COBOL, like jump to a new version. Or I want to make it faster, or I want to create a Christmas version of this, or, I want to localize it. Just sort of observe like monetization and conversion and try things out. And you'd know that the capturing of what your system does is defined, the guardrails are defined. And so you can put the LLM, the AI labor to work to try and optimize it, knowing that you've defined the intents and the guardrails and kind of the sandbox within which they can play. So there's a lot to develop there, but that's the sort of the path forward.
And what stage is the company at now?
So we raised an early Series A for it. And so we're well funded.
I assume that was relatively easy given your background at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, but I got great investors. I got Bold Start and GV, Tom Heem at GV. It was great. And I got Carlos at Index, and got some Excel backing from Philippe. And so very good investors, an amazing team that I keep being humbled by. And we built out the community, as we mentioned earlier. Even ahead of product, we built out this sort of AI native dev community. We have our own podcast, AI Native Dev. I encourage you to subscribe or check it out. That I co-host with Simon Maple. And we built this community. We run a conference multiple times a year. The community today, like when you look at followers and subscribers and all that, is approaching 70,000 people. So it's like a broad audience of people that care about AI dev. Our product is more nascent than that. It is, still in closed beta of it. We have many users that are giving us great feedback on it. And stay tuned for the November AI Native DevCon, and November 19th. There's going to be some big openings. We did launch an open beta of part of our product, the sort of the spec registry, and it's getting some great initial response.
And just quickly, when did you raise the A and how much was it?
We raised $125 million in total, like $100 million A and a $25 million seed. And we raised the last one back in September. I would sort of point out I'm in an unusual state, from a founder perspective. Like I don't always encourage raising so much ahead, but we're very keen. Like I say it privately, and I'm happy to say publicly as well. It's like I've got zero interest in building something small. And so we're building big. The AI world is messy, and it was important for us to be able to have the wherewithal to go long and build for that future. And so we built that up. And I guess I trust, and we've demonstrated so far, our discipline around using the money well, but not pre-spending it. And so we lost optionality because we raised ahead, which I'm fine with. And we need to be disciplined with the money, which is how we're operating it. And practically the entirety of that amount by like massive percentages is still in the bank. And so it's more about autonomy and having great partners for the journey.
Okay, cool. Well, listen, let's stop it there, and I'll ask the 3 questions we always end on. This is for Tessl or for Snyk, whichever one makes most sense. But when was the time when you felt like you'd found true product market fit?
Yeah, for Snyk, it's pretty clear. It's in that stretch between August and December of 2017. We started to get these inbounds from the tailwind we created with the developer community, from the security teams, and they're in like every conversation came an inbound. And definitely the year that followed, which it was all about how do you deal with the inbound.
And then last question, just based on everything, hundreds of angel investments, your story with Snyk, and then before selling to Akamai and now with Tessl, like what would be some of your number one piece of advice for an early stage founder?
Well, one, you want to anchor in the future and think about a product that in 5 years' time will be more important, more needed, not less, because the most precious thing you have is your time. And therefore, the kind of worst case scenario is not to get to crash and burn with your company, but to get stuck, to get to a company that is at 2 million ARR, 3 million ARR, growing 30% year on year. It's kind of enough that you don't really want to just cut loose and go, but not what you signed up for. Think about where you are headed. You still need to, have big vision, small steps, and sort of think about how you proceed there. But if you don't know what the destination is and you're just covering a gap that exists today, you would lose your time. And that's, again, sort of the biggest loss. So this is the venture world, aim high.
Love it. Well, Guy, thanks so much for spending the time, man. It's been great.
Thank you.
Wow, what an episode. You're probably in awe. You're in absolute shock. You're like, that helped me so much. So guess what? Now it's your turn to help someone else. Share the episode in the WhatsApp group you have with founders. Share it on that Slack channel. Send it to your founder friends and help them out. Trust me, they will love you for it.